So Kant on line. It certainly looks like Kant is a moral absolutist. In fact, Kant is typically interpreted that way, or often interpreted that way. Your textbook, and many, along with many other introduction to ethics textbooks, teach Kant in this way. And you can see why, because of his view of perfect duties that come out of like the universalizability test, right? And so just because you're an absolutist, however, doesn't mean you have to be in if you're not an absolutist, not like you have to choose between absolutism and relativism or something. There is a moderate form of objectivism. And so I'm proposing here a possible alternative interpretation of some of Kant here. So here's that categorical imperative again: act as if the maxim of thy action were to become by thy will a universal law of nature. Kant's idea here is that if moral truths are necessary and objective and intrinsic, then they have to carry the force of law with them. They have to be a matter of necessity, not contingency. So again, lots of necessity language, right, being used. And of course, he distinguishes perfect and imperfect duties. Perfect duties are duties from which you have no escape. So it looks like at least some duties fit that absolutist view according to Kant. And then we've talked about his examples here. The promise example is probably the best example of this, because a promise that you don't intend to keep looks like a contradiction in terms. So it looks like you've always got to keep your promises. So on the face of it, what does it look like Kant is saying to the murderer at the door scenario? That you got to return it, and then it's on the other guy to will there to see if they should will whatever maxim that they're thinking about operating on, right? The utilitarian has an easy answer. For the greatest good, don't just break the promise, right? But it looks like Kantianism says that we've always got to keep our promises and that we've always got to tell the truth. So Kant even has this line about this idea. He says, truthfulness in statements that one cannot avoid is a human being's duty to everyone, however great the disadvantage to him or another that may result from it. Again, there's that non-teleological idea, right? Right conduct is not based on getting what we want, even collectively. He says, if I falsify, I do wrong in the most essential part of duty in general by such falsification. That is, I bring it about as far as I can that statements, declarations in general are not believed. And so too that all rights which are based on contracts come to nothing and lose their force. And this is a wrong inflicted upon humanity in general. For a lie always harms another, even if not another individual, nevertheless humanity in general, in so much as it makes the source of right unusable. So you see that kind of passage, and it's real tempting for the obvious reason here to interpret Kant as an absolutist about lying. So there's our murder at the door scenario. And then Kant even says this about such scenarios. The example here is a little bit different because it's about lying rather than promise keeping, but it certainly looks like the same lesson applies. So he says, after you've honestly answered the murderer's question as to whether the intended victim is at home, it may be that he has slipped out so that he does not come in the way of the murderer, and thus the murderer may not be committed. But if you had lied and said he was not at home when he had gone out without your knowing it, and if the murderer had then met him as he went away and murdered him, you might justly be accused of the cause of the death. For if you had told the truth as far as you knew it, perhaps the murderer might have been apprehended by neighbors while he searched the house, and thus the deed might have been prevented. So it looks like Kant is this absolutist, right? So here's my big but, which is drawn from some other passages in Kant. And I think this gives you a little bit of pause with exactly what does Kantianism imply about the murderer at the door scenario. All right. On the one hand, it looks like Kant is obviously saying we got to keep promises. On this point, I'm saying it's not so fast, right? So he says, if we were at all times to be punctiliously truthful or promise keeping, we might often become victims of wickedness of others who are ready to abuse our truthfulness. If all men were well intentioned, it would not only be a duty not to lie, but no one would do so because there would be no point. But as men are malicious, it cannot be denied that to be punctitiously truthful is often dangerous. If I cannot save myself by maintaining silence, then my lies are a weapon of self-defense. And it looks like so could promise breaking be a weapon of self-defense. So Kant's making a kind of a distinction here. In an ideal world, there's an absolute duty because everyone would be well-intended. But in the real world, where some people don't have good intentions, things are a little bit different. Yeah.
But then basically we can't trying to apply the I forgot what kind of comparative it was on telling truths and stuff like that when you think about it.
Well, the categorical is the basis for determining the morality of truth telling.
Oh, okay.
Everything, according to Kantian ethics, has to be based on the categorical imperative. And then we have some other considerations. According to Kant, I only have duties to what kinds of beings?
Rational?
Rational beings. Are drunk people rational?
Not really.
Typically not. Their rationality is impaired, so maybe I have an out. A justification for delay, or to tell a non-truth, or return the chainsaw without gas in it or something, right? Secondly, I have a duty to make sure that I, a rational being, am not used as a mere means. What is the murderer at the door trying to do to me?
Give back his chainsaw for you, which kind of makes you
A means
to attain it back.
That's right. So again, it looks like I have some justification for not exactly being forthright or returning the chainsaw, according to Kantianism. Right? So if we reject absolutism, what does that mean is left? Well, we might have something like prima facie duties, that there are duties of first appearance, but then they get trumped by other duties, right? And the other problem that arises with the murder at the door scenario, and you can see this from the post in the discussion forum, is that many of you have different takes on what exactly the maxim is in the scenario. And so long as you did Kantian stuff, it's good. If you did harm, then that's bad because harm's not a part of Kantianism. But there's the debate, as the textbook talks about, how do we actually identify our maxim when it's not always clear? So that's a problem for performing the test then, right? It can be. Works really well for simple cases, right? But more complex cases where there's more question about what the maxim is, we have more problems, right? So notice that when you say I'm going to lie or break my promise to the murderer at the door, it's not because you're automatically going, there's no such thing as moral truth. There's just an overriding moral truth or norm that takes precedence, right? So there's the prima facie duty. So your textbook presents Kant this way, and I just want to note that there's some dispute here over how to interpret Kant there. All right, questions